Welcome, everybody, to this month's educational series with Dr. Thomas Griggs. He is a fellow board member here with at Dawn. We are here for our once a month online gathering where we have a presentation and Q&A that people living in or interested in intentional communities might find interesting or educational. So I'm just going to pass it over to Thomas.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, we've got the title Community, What Does It Take? And that generally refers to how do we meet the challenges of creating and sustaining intentional communities? What does it take to do that? Particularly in light of the fact that the environment is becoming increasingly challenging. The good news is that what I'm going to share with you tonight that's derived from sociology, it applies to any complexity, any conflict, any organization, any problem solving. It's a form of critical thinking. And so no matter how dramatic things get, you can still effectively use a model of thinking critically about your circumstance. So for me, I was trained as a clinical psychologist, and my first master's was in psychotherapy and social change back in the early mid 70s. And I was lucky enough to have a professor who came down from Harvard through no fault of my own as a guest professor. And he was a colleague of a guy named Talcott Parsons, who was a sociologist in the 30s up there. And Dr. Adams, our professor, introduced me to this concept of different levels. And he was absolutely rigorous about it. And he would stop a conversation cold if we got our levels confused. So it made a big impression on me. And it's been a bedrock to everything I've done in the field of conflict resolution with organizations, which I've done for 3-4 decades. And it's bedrock to working in environments where diversity, equity, and inclusion is the primary topic. So there are, what we're going to do roughly, I'll give you 20 minutes worth of an idea and put it out, and then we'll take 50 minutes of Q&A and any examples that you want to bring up about how to apply it in an area that is relevant to you. Greetings, Helen. So these are logical categories of consideration, both in creating and maintaining community. You can use what we're going to talk about in the preliminary conversations. In fact, it's, I would say, mandatory that you do so in order to organize the possibilities when you first begin to think about intentional community, all the way through to one that's been around for 30 years and is wanting to address some rather gnarly challenges. You can also use it if you want to build a culture, create a culture. So whether you regard yourself as a leader or not, everybody in an intentional community has a role. And I'm in the habit of referring to those as leadership roles. So whether it's obvious or not, extroverted, introverted, large or small, it's still an essential role. So we're all leaders in my world. And so these can be understood as the 6 levels of leadership, in addition to the 6 levels of strategy to create and maintain an intentional community. I'm not going to try to list the array of challenges that we're all facing these days. I think you're already saturated with that, is my expectation. So there's no need to do that. But you can bring up anything at any level in any domain that you want, whether it's private and personal or whether it's global. It doesn't matter, and you'll see why you're free to raise anything when we get to the Q&A section. This is a short course in critical thinking. And now, if you will, Sarah, if you will make me co-host, it is time for me to share my screen.
Lily.
I'm not seeing it yet.
Oh, you didn't? Okay, I also
Nope.
think I muted too. Said, do you want to change? Okay, you should be host now.
Okay, there it just came through.
And
All
just
right,
in
thanks.
case I can't see the waiting room, you might just have to keep an eye on it, FYI.
Yeah, that's a little tricky.
And I will just say, while you're getting that pulled up, Thomas, um, tonight's gathering is an optional donation of $10. I will put in the chat the donation button to the NICA page, and it's the same page where you can create a membership for your community or an individual. So I'll just put that in the chat as I see you got that pulled up. So thanks, Thomas.
Okie doke. Okay, so I've referred briefly to ways in which you can use this form of critical thinking, but just to enumerate a few of those, you can start by understanding your own leadership style or your own skill set by running it through this filter, because there's different skills associated with each one of these levels. You can use this to assemble a complete leadership team. And what that means is get a team together that has skills at each one of these levels. And this all makes sense when we get more into what they are. You can use this always to define challenges in a way that makes them solvable. And one of the main dysfunctions of groups who take on big challenges is that they neutralize each other, not by disagreeing or not by telling truths and untruths. They neutralize each other by all telling truths. That is, they're everybody, but they're all going in a different direction with what they're right about. So this is a way to define the challenge at 6 levels so that people can go to one level at a time and have success at implementing a strategy at that level before going to the next one, instead of arguing about which level is the most important, which I don't recommend. So I just mentioned it's useful for selecting the right strategies. I've already said it for designing the culture that you want. And Mohammed, would you turn off your...
I apologize.
All right. Otherwise, I'm going to call that artwork and I'm not going to worry about it. The other thing that's interesting about this is you can define you can make a strategic plan by defining the outcomes that you're after in any enterprise. And the way you do that is, oh, we've got Natasha doing artwork now too. You can, if you define the evidence that you want to collect at each one of these levels, it naturally falls out into giving you strategies at each one of those levels. So your strategies are those actions which will give you the evidence you need to collect, which will be the proof that you succeeded at what you were doing. I know that's abstract, but I'm just trying to give you enough to begin to think about what your questions might be. You can always use the levels to match your communication to your audience, which you will see shortly, and you can use it to provide targeted recognition and rewards of people. I know there's a function whereby I can disable people's ability to annotate this, but I don't think I'm going to take the time to chase that down. Yeah, okay, so that's a problem.
Can you make me co-host again?
Maybe I can make you host and you can track that down. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah.
All right. I think we've been bombed here. What it is.
Unfortunate.
No, I've turned on that. I want to turn that off.
Did you make me co-host?
I'm working on it. I'm trying to do too many things at once because of the bombing, and 16 messages in chat, which I'm not able to see it while I'm trying to go through the presentation. That's just me getting distracted. So,
Can you get to the participants?
okay, so now I've made you host, and if you can kind of troubleshoot the noise that's happening, that would be great. But everybody can still see the screen, right? Okay, great. So let's get to the levels. What are they? Well, these levels are, they refer to the different audiences that you will want to communicate with or through. So everything that happens in the world happens through people. It happens through individuals. It happens through pairs, partners, and it happens through teams and groups. And it happens by communicating to the outside world. And it happens because we have some kind of mechanical infrastructure to help us out. That's the institutional level. So you'll notice the flow here of the audience size goes from 1 to 2 to 3 to anyone to a subset of anyone, which is us. And the reason it's us is because we often hear the phrase us versus them, and us versus them usually refers to one identity group compared to another identity group. But let me back up a little bit. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, I'm afraid it seems like we have several bombers.
Yeah, we might. So Sarah, I think you can block them or remove them. Well, all right. I'm going to keep going and just trust that you can do that. So at the personal level, the audience is myself. I'm talking to myself. And Johnny Cash famously said, he was talking to some of his friends. He said, it's okay if you talk to yourself as long as you talk man to man. So internal dialogue is personal level stuff. That's my thoughts, feelings, beliefs, my needs. And in this case, it would be my vision of leadership or my understanding of my role, my understanding of my limits, recognition of what skills I have and I don't have. That's personal level perspective. And sometimes action needs to occur just at that level. I need to get my head straight, and I shouldn't go out and mess with the world until I do. So personal level action becomes the priority. But it's not always the priority, and it's not automatically the priority, and it's not where you start. Every problem is a mixture of these levels. And you want to get in the habit of surveying all these levels for any given challenge that you face, any given opportunity you face. And then the art of leadership is selecting which of these levels, which of these communications, which of these audiences, which of these strategies are the most important to do first, second, and third. And what's interesting about this is we can be blocked at one of these levels. Like there can be a law against something at the institutional level. There can be a law against what we want to do. But that doesn't mean we're blocked at that level, because law arises from cultural agreement. And if we organize a protest, we can change the law. If we mount a widespread communication strategy, I was going to say assault. If we mount a widespread communication strategy, that then has the possibility of influencing structure or influencing policy, procedure, and budgets, and so on. Okay, so and I can be blocked at multiple levels, but at the personal level, I can never really be blocked because nobody controls that but me. So there's always some place I can find power. I'm never completely stuck. I've never seen that happen. It's just a matter of which one of these levels is going to unlock the solution. So going from personal to interpersonal, that's the domain of interpersonal communication. Now, there's communication at every one of these levels. So communication doesn't automatically mean one-to-one communication. But at the interpersonal level, that is exactly what it means. It refers to speaking and listening and understanding between two people. That's a very specific skill set. Some people are very good listeners and very good communicators one-on-one, but you put them in a group and that's not their skill. And some people are really good at the group level of running meetings, managing group dynamics. That doesn't mean necessarily that they're particularly good at one-on-one communication. They probably are, but not necessarily, because group now is defined as 3 or more people up to some finite number. It could be 1,000 people that are all attending the same conference, or it could be 10,000 people that are on a particular mailing list. So, but the point being, it's a finite list. And I can, or you can, we can communicate to that finite list. That's a group. You can manage a group because it is finite and because you know who the people are. So anything about teams, anything about meetings, anything about group dynamics or group process, that's here. That's what those skills are. And some people are good at that, and others, it's not their thing. Then you go, if they keep moving up the number of audience here, societal is one to anyone. It's the infinite number of the public. It's the planetary society. Mass media, art, architecture, symbolic communication, and positive gossip, and negative gossip too for that matter, there's no boundary on the audience. That can go anywhere and everywhere. So society is the biggest audience, and it has its own communication vehicles that you use to reach anybody and everybody. Art and architecture being good examples of that. Music, songs are societal level communication, potentially if they're released to the world. Then, now, since societal level is so big, it's so massive, and not everybody has the natural skill to communicate with the entire world, you can break society down into cultural subgroups. And those are best understood as identity groups, where people recognize themselves as being the same as each other. So that's the cultural subset is where we are down here. Once again, it's one-to-many communications, but it's categorical. It's a subset. So it could be, I want to talk to only youth, or I'm aiming my work just toward children, or just toward elders, or I want to talk just to men, or I want to break out the women in an organization because I specifically want female leadership in a binary world. I want to extract and highlight some female membership and influence. And now that's a much broader category these days. Ability, it's the same. I might want to talk to some people that have a certain set of skills, like say language. You could call that education. You can break identity groups down by language. Formally educated and informally educated, there are different kinds of communications, but they are subsets of society. Okay? So, and then institutional is the machinery that supports communication and strategy at all those other levels. So I've already gone over that. Now, that's it. Those are the 6. Now, from here on, it's just a matter of playing with them and applying them to any situation that you can imagine. Because remember, this is elemental critical thinking. Okay? I think I will put these in the chat, and I'm going to stop share. Were you able, Sarah, to look at all of the messages that came through the chat while I was doing what I was doing?
Yes.
Great. So you've handled whatever came up there?
Yep.
All right.
Okay.
So,
I haven't seen. Cool. Thanks for putting.
okay, they all came through. So if you
Yeah.
pull it up in the chat, you can see you can see the levels for reference from here. And we've got 12 people in the room at the moment.
Thank you for putting
Okay,
that.
cool.
Yeah.
All right, let's throw it open now. That gives us 50 minutes at least. Oh, actually, let me give you one example of a situation in which I can use this 6-level thinking. I was in Chicago some years back, and I was co-leading a diversity training. And it was a large mixed group, men and women, black and white, young and old. And there were some 40 people in the room. And I was up front, I had the mic. And it was the second day of the training, I think. And people were feeling confident enough to begin to speak their mind. Although some people felt fine about doing that on day one. But it was somewhere in the morning of day two. And a woman stood up and she called me a racist. So what do you do in a situation like that? Well, I'd been relying on the levels for quite some time. So I said, yeah, I bet that's true. And I want to know exactly what you mean by that. Do you mean that you see in me prejudice? Do you see beliefs that I'm carrying or misinformation that I have? And she said, no, that's not what I'm talking about. And I said, did I say something to you yesterday that was particularly offensive? If so, I'd like a chance to make that up. And she said, no, that's not what I'm talking about. And I said, and I think about institutional level, do you see me as somehow perpetuating institutions, like giving my time and money to racist institutions? And she says, no, that's not what I'm talking about. And so I said, do I represent all white people to you? And she said, hell yes. She said, you know what happened to me? This happened to me yesterday, and this happened, and this happened. A lot of it wasn't even in the room. It wasn't what we were doing. It was what she encountered out in the world. She said, I had this offense and that offense, and this pissed me off, and that pissed me off. I am just fed up with you people. Okay, so I said, well, I understand. My group has done a lot of mean shit to your group. I get that. And I understand that I remind you of all that. And is there more you want to say? So all I'm being is a symbol of my cultural group, but I'm not taking it personally. And there's no interpersonal offense. So now I know exactly what she means by I'm a racist, that I represent my group. So is there any more you want to say? And she said, thank you. For once, somebody finally listened to me. Okay. You could call that precision learning if you want to. That's just an everyday garden variety way of thinking about this. Okay. So let's switch over to any questions you're curious about. You can ask anything you want about the nature of the levels, how they're used, or you can give us a particular situation that you're living through or you want to address, or that you're anticipating you might address. And then we'll play with it. I'll show you how you can use these levels to illuminate and define the situation. It's best if you can use the React button down below and select raise your hand. But if you don't find that, you can stick your hand up and wave. Jonathan, what you got?
Yeah, thanks very much for that example, Thomas. That's the very kind of thing I wanted to get out of this. I've heard your analysis before and sometimes have trouble imagining putting it to use. But with your example in mind, I am thinking about my particular community's difficulties in recruiting people to join us. And we actually I actually think well, we at least are trying to understand why it's so hard to get people to come and join us. We are half or more than half what you might call elderly, that is retired, and one, perhaps two people in their 20s and 30s. We have no people of color at the moment. We're more or less 50-50 men and women, but we're really working hard to find more people, and we can't discern whether it's the specific qualifications that we ask people to bring to us. That is, among other things, having no pets, which seems to be a huge one. But is there something else that we're missing? Is there something cultural? Is there something on the institutional level? I don't know. How would you see us making use of this framework in addressing our situation?
Sure. Okay. That's an excellent one. The gnarlier the conflict or the challenge, the easier it is to apply the levels, really. So, yes, of course, it's cultural. And it's obviously cultural because you're referring to different identity groups. All diversity questions are cultural questions, by definition in this framework. It's also, of course, personal, because it does depend on your personal commitment and your personal clarity about what it is you are doing and what you want. It also depends on your personal comfort in interacting with members of other cultures. So you go to the interpersonal level, and you could probably chart which of all the different identity groups you're most comfortable with and down to least comfortable with. But then you can turn it around and you can say, for any given candidate, who are the one-to-one encounters that they are going to be having? What's their one-to-one encounter with me? How do they experience me? What's it feel like? And what's the communication like? Is the communication complete between us as a dyad? Because some people are going to make the decision to join a community based on interpersonal experience of having been heard and recognized. Somebody else is actually going to not worry about that so much, and they're going to be interested in what are the structural, institutional level dynamics of this living situation. What are my responsibilities there? What are the rules and the operating agreements? What are the covenants? So some people are going to react to that. You would best want to assume that your candidate pool is going to react to something at every one of these levels. They're also going to react to what the experience of being in the group is like, and whether or not a meeting that they attend is a meeting they want to come back to. There's the punchline, right? So it's all of that. They also want to know, now if you go to the societal level, it's what is the reputation of Bright Morning Star? What does the community say about you and your community? What's your reputation? So reputation is a societal level event. So you can also, let's say another thing about the institutional level around diversity. What is the practical reality of the size of your house? How many spots are there when it's completely full? And let's just say that that's 10 people. I don't know for sure what your number is, but let's just say it's 10 people. Okay, well, given the institutional reality of that number, and given that how many spots are already taken, how many open spots do you actually have? And how much diversity can you get into those very, very few spots? So that's an institutional limitation, especially given the fact that historically marginalized groups want to be with people of their own identity. And you don't want only one person from a group. You want at least two, and three is better. But logistically, institutionally, you probably don't have the room for a subgroup of 3 or 4 people who are Black, or 3 or 4 people who are young. And if you get one young, Black, gay, disabled person and you highlight them to bring in your community so you can tick off the boxes, they're going to be the loneliest person in the world. So you don't want to do that. So so notice when you scan all this, where do you spend your time? Well, given an institutional analysis, let's be fair about the expectations. Let's not try to do something we can't do. And I can tell you from over 3 decades of doing diversity work, the single most common thing that white people do is overreach. This cultural group always expects an unreasonable outcome or an impossible result. I see it every day, over and over and over. You know, I want to have a one-day conference to end racism. Yeah, okay. Think that's maybe a little unfair? Okay. Anything else, Jonathan?
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Okay.
I put our community's link in the chat so people can see it.
Okay. All right. So one other thing. Let me go to group here. You may, and this is a common recommendation, you may want to achieve your diversity by developing relationships with other groups around Morningstar rather than trying to have that be residential. And in
Yes,
fact, that would set you up. That would set you
Yep.
up the best to get residents with more diversity.
I strongly agree with that.
Yeah, I figured you probably would. As long as you've been in the intentional community movement, I think you'd agree with that. Claudia, what you got?
Hi, thank you very much. I want to start at the institutional level and see if you can help us find a way to create what we keep trying to create, but we run into institutional issues. That would be, there's a lot of people out there on the road who choose to live in vans. Those who do it because they have to, and those who do it because they want to. So it's a large group of people. And we're trying to find a way to create a community of van people who actually have their space there. They can leave and go and travel and then come back. So we have a lot of ideas, and Justin's the one who's been heading this up. The issue always comes down to zoning. And I'm in the legal profession, so, you know, I do my research. But what we're finding, and if I'm wrong, and maybe you have a different way to approach it, is that saying to yourself, well, let's just go ahead and do it. If they come and get us, then it's easier to ask for, you know, forgiveness than permission. But also, if you've sunk a lot of money in it, it's gone. And the problem is that to do a zoning change is set up, at least in California, it's so difficult. You have to jump so many hoops. So I guess my question is, do we not try to do something in a state that's going to cause us to have, you know, a lawyer and go to the zoning board over and over? Or is there another way to look at it that we're not seeing?
Okay. Are you in California, in fact?
Yes. Justin has a piece of property in California and a piece of property in Oregon.
Okay. Whereabouts in California?
Reading.
Uh-huh. Okay. Gorgeous. All right. So institutional barriers, some people, who lives in the world of institutional barriers? Who knows the most about that? Well, real estate people do, and municipal planners do, people that control the codes, people that have already done what you want to do somewhere in another state or another region, though they would have that expertise of having gone through that. There are people here in the NICA community who have quite a bit of experience having done some version of that may or may not apply to California, but there is a whole subset of people in the Northwest intentional community who are primarily interested in options at the institutional level. So you can come hang out, find out who those people are, and start spending time with them. Now, I know there are people in Oakland that have probably addressed this for the past 30 years, because some of them have shown up at our gatherings. Jonathan was sticking his hand up because he's been around for 30, 40 years, and he's got experience in addressing a lot of institutional level junk. But it would depend on exactly what your particular barriers are. And I would say, I can't give you a solution, partly because that's not the world in which I live, and partly because I don't know the specifics of what your circumstance is. What I would say is, I would think about, at what level am I going to find the best resources to help me out? And so you'd ask the question, who's the #1 guru in the United States who's famous for this being their area of expertise? Who is that? How do I find that person? Or go to the group level, and what group in the United States has the most information about this? Would it be FIC? Would it be the Foundation for Intentional Community? Maybe. I do know that Sky Blue, who's out here at an intentional community, Sahali, not far from us, where I am in Bothell, Washington, he's very interested in alternative financing of intentional communities. Yeah, Rains Cohen is down in Oakland, right, Jonathan? Yeah. So if you don't know Rains, he would be somebody to get up with. And John put his link in the chat. Okay, so you begin to think strategically about where the answer lies and where your best counsel can be found. Presumably, you've already done a bunch of that, right? What have you found? Where do you think the best resource is, or the best support to address these questions? Claudia?
Yeah, I've been involved with five now groups that are trying to do this, and each one, there's no, here's the deal. Intentional communities where you're going to have people living in homes, tiny homes, big homes, whatever, that's not an issue. People who want to live in vans, but don't want to live in an RV park, but want to have an intentional community of van people, there is no model right now. That's the issue. I mean, there's a group called Van Life Communities. They started and they got big, and then they've shrunk because they can't sustain it. So yeah, there are no gurus that I'm aware of.
Okay. All right.
So it's just that's my question really just is, you're saying go to the people who maybe already have figured this out?
Well, I'm scanning the levels to see where the possibilities might lie for some kind
Got
of
it.
break. Okay.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
let's keep going, because what is it that trumps the law? What trumps zoning?
I have no idea.
An unmanageable population trumps zoning. More people do. You didn't hear this from me. An unmanageably large number of people doing something that the municipality does not have the resources to chase. So do you know what deprioritization means? Like in the world of psychedelics, there is decriminalization, and then there's also legalization, and there's also deprioritization.
Prioritization.
Okay, that's where a city council understands the problem and cares about the problem and passes a resolution to the police department, who report to the city council saying, you will make this your lowest possible priority. After you get everything else of importance done, then you have our permission to turn your attention to that issue. Okay? So that is really a story that's being told, right? It's a narrative. And you get a narrative comes from positive gossip. And you can foment positive gossip. You can create a story that is so appealing that so many people will show up and say, you are doing something really cool. You're solving a problem that needs to be solved. I love it. And when you generate that kind of enthusiasm through societal level and cultural level storytelling, and you get an attraction rather than promotion dynamic going, you can build a force that can be somewhat robust to obsessive nitpickers in the zoning department. And I've worked with a lot of municipalities. I know a lot of people who are responsible for policing codes.
Yeah, okay.
And I
Thank
know
you.
how busy they are.
This is great.
All right.
So create a overwhelming need, not need, but create an overwhelming attraction that brings so many people in that, yeah, I get it. That's very helpful. Yeah.
That's your story. Now, here's the thing. Some people in your community are naturally gifted at doing that.
Got it.
I don't know if you are or not, but I know some people are really good at that. They can make their living doing that.
Okay. That's
who you want on your team. You want somebody that creates an idea that's so compelling, podcasters can't wait to put it on the air. I'm serious. I mean, we've done this before because I know podcasters and authors and reporters are all looking for good content. And all you need to do is have a really good hook and a really good pitch to them. Then they do all the work to create the story and publicize what you are doing. It's called free publicity. You ever seen one of those trucks that says 1-800-JUNK on the side?
Yeah.
Okay. That was born in, I think, Montreal or Toronto, Ottawa. It was born somewhere in a major city in Canada. Some guy had a pickup truck and he saw writing on a handwritten painted on the side of some truck, got junk, I'll haul it for you. And so he created a business called 1-800-GOT-JUNK. And now it's listed on the New York Stock Exchange. They are all over the country, probably overseas. And the way he did it was with free publicity. He just called over and over. He called all these news outlets and reporters and photographers, not just reporters, but photographers. And he said, I'm going to give you a story. And they publicized this thing, and his business grew like wildfire because he switched levels, in effect. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Have fun. Yep. It's more people attracted if it's fun, right? What else we got? Mark, what do you got?
I guess my question stems from what you just, can you hear me?
Yeah, fine.
Okay, good. These headsets a little fickle. In the arc of achieving an avalanche of popularity to the extent that you can affect, by popularity, come to a place where people kind of have to accept or, you find that route, it feels like a vulnerable arc if you're approaching things like social media platforms. You're trying to get your message out. It does. I have thought about this a lot and thought, God, it's like quite the vulnerable process. If you don't quite succeed, then you've got lots of visibility, and then you succumb to the risk of, that concerns me. It's held me back in a few instances or approaches, and I wonder what you think about that. Is it kind of an all or nothing? You really got to go for it and hope for you reach the critical mass in terms of that approach?
No, it's great. No, I love it. It's a perfect question. Take the concept of vulnerability and run it through all 6 levels and ask yourself, which version of vulnerability am I talking about? Where's the vulnerability coming from? Is the vulnerability, for example, that you're going to be sued and you're going to lose everything? Is that what you're talking about? See, it's the same thing as the racism question. Or are you vulnerable because some key relationship in your life is not going to survive your attempt to move this forward? Or is it that the group of people that are working on this with you feel weak and vulnerable themselves? It's a group vulnerability where they don't have solidarity. They're not shoring each other up. They're not empowering each other. So vulnerability might be the absence of empowerment in the group, maybe. Because I could imagine that you might feel vulnerable at the personal level because of your own emotional psychology, and that you would be in a group that was going, Mark, we got your back, man. We're going to make this happen. And nothing's going to stop that group, right? It's such a strong team that they're not vulnerable and they protect you. So you keep working these levels. Where does the threat come from and where does the protection come from? If you are at risk, is the risk occurring only really in your own mind? If it is, then the protection is going to come from you changing your way of thinking. If the threat, the danger, the vulnerability is coming from an individual, then you begin to strategize about a relationship with that one person. If you think your threat is coming from a group, then you start to think about intergroup communication. And maybe you think about societal level storytelling and positive gossip that can put a little pressure on a group. I think which of those levels do you think is the one that's most at play when you talk about feeling vulnerable? Where do you think the threat's originating?
Oh, I think, well, I grew up in a community that was dismantled on a sort of governmental level. I think so, but the thing that's interesting about that is the trauma of that translates to on an individual level right now, as I look at it. Yeah. But having experienced something where, like, in retrospect, that was a systematic effort by the government to dismantle a community, that's an interesting thing, on a level. Like, I remember people getting taken right out of the community forcibly, and there was nothing we could do about it. I was just a kid, but I think so. I don't know. It's a kind of a complex thing, but I think if I'm being honest, in this moment, it is. I have never examined that question, and I guess whatever my answer is, to be able to put it against this metric that you're talking about does bring a lot of resilience. It's like, well, then engage with that threat on those different levels and down those different spectrums. Because honestly, if the institution dismantles you, you're going to get dismantled, I think mostly, I think for most people. But that doesn't mean that you can't then fall back almost in concentric rings in assessing what the threat is to you, and how can you build resilience in each of those steps to respond. Like, you always have to have a plan B. So I guess that would be as close to an answer as I could get.
Yeah, plan B, C, D, E, and F. Because you can be blocked at one level, but you're never blocked at all levels. And the external environment has power at one level, but not at all levels. So which level do they have power at? And which levels do they not have power at? My strategies are going to be at all the levels that I actually have control and influence on. And they will trump whatever the blockage is, one way or another. So yeah, I agree with you. The first thing you said when I asked, where do you think it's coming from? The first word out of your mouth was I. You didn't say we or they, although you could have. You didn't say it. So yeah, I think that's a good track to be on. Get yourself surrounded by a group of people and start listening to how they describe the threats that they think are out there. And if you do, you'll hear them fan out over these 6 levels probably. So scare as an emotion signals the apprehension of some kind of danger or threat. And what we need is protection from that threat, real or imagined. We need protection for that. And so the protection comes from some mix of those levels. That's the simplest way to put it. And if you get the wrong level, no amount of protection at that level will help you. It won't work. I had a woman actually that was, I ran a business development group some years ago back in North Carolina. And one of the people owned a large graphic printing business. And she was afraid to make big presentations to large clients. Keyword afraid. We know scare means there's some kind of danger, right? So exactly where's the danger coming from? I just ran it through the levels. And I said, what's at risk if you do a presentation and it doesn't go well? She said, well, the word would get out that I don't know what I'm doing. That person would talk all over town. I'd get a bad reputation. My business would dry up. I'd lose my business. I'd be alone and penniless on the street. And I'm quoting her. This is actually what she said. And I said, okay, so where is the danger coming from out of, is it coming from some procedure, policy? She said, no. Was it coming from a particular group of people? And she went, no. Is it coming from a particular individual, like one-on-one, the danger's one-on-one? She said, no. And she said, I said, is this a danger that occurs in your head? And she goes, yeah, absolutely. So you've been scaring yourself about this, right? So the protection's got to come from something at the personal level, because no amount of group reassurance in our well-intended business development group, she wasn't buying any of their reassurance. They had all these ideas about what she could do, and she didn't buy any of them. That's because they were all at the other 5 levels. So we got down to the personal level and said, oh, so you're scaring yourself about that. And she goes, when I think about it, I don't need to be afraid about that, because my God would never allow me to be penniless and alone on the street. That was it. All we had to do was find the right level, and she could find her protection. So that's the model. Play with it, play with it. Anything else for you, Mark? All right. We got time. Anybody else? You can tell stories if you know.
Thanks for joining, Michael. Michael just left.
Bye,
Well, if no
Michael.
one has a question, I could ask a philosophical one.
A hypothetical?
No, I guess to dig in about what you've presented so far. Because what I've heard from both people who've asked questions is what we've identified, or I've kind of pieced together from what you're saying too, is that there's always a threat and there's always protection. Is that true? And like hearing you say that the protection is found in some array of the different levels, is that kind of the essence of what the complexity is that there's always a threat and always protection, and how to...
I've never seen a situation in which the threat couldn't be identified as originating at a particular level. Now, I can think of an individual that I saw a while back who was scared, and it was very clearly something that she was generating in her own mind. She didn't come up with a protection that she could implement for herself. That doesn't mean that such a protection didn't exist. What it did mean was there was no point in other people trying to protect her, including me. And that's pretty valuable. Not to spin your wheels on activity at all these different levels when you know in advance that's not what's going on. So I think that's philosophically, maybe that's what I would say. I happen to think there's always this is just what I believe. that there's always a protection for any threat. And that's because I have control of my mind. And I get to interpret that the way I want. But I'm much more of a real world guy about, I don't trade in hypotheticals much, because they're notoriously unsatisfying. The best you get is a hypothetical answer,
Yes, I know this about you. So
Yeah,
in
that
the
about
case in the case of zoning, to go into something practical, the threat of zoning, the would the I guess the protection or the antidote to that complexity be finding people who are doing it. I mean, that's what I heard you say, is like the protection, quote unquote, to the confusion around it, or the block or the threat that it's creating.
Well, in terms of problem solving, that's a fair question to ask. I mean, I'd love to ask, where has this already been solved?
Mhm.
I'd love to ask, who knows much more about this than I do? Those are fun questions.
Yeah, I do ask. Who knows about zoning?
Yeah, but there's another thing going on that, like, sometimes an individual in your community is committed to pointing out how everything won't work. No matter what you say, they're going to tell you why it doesn't work. It's a game Eric Byrne identified years and years ago in the 60s when he wrote his book, Games People Play, and he labeled the game, Why Don't You? Yes, But. And it's a two-handed game where one well-meaning person is taking more responsibility for solving a person's problem than that individual is taking themselves. And the individual that has the problem is just effortlessly throwing out reasons why none of the well-intended advice will work. Why don't you do this? Oh, yeah, but that won't work. Well, how about this? No, that won't work. Thank you for helping me, but that didn't really help. So that whole dynamic of, if that's what's going on, what level does that suggest to you to understand the situation? Can I pass a rule that will change that person's behavior? Probably not. Maybe if the whole group around them, everybody at the table, were to simultaneously say, I noticed that no matter what anybody says, you find fault with it. Are you aware you do that? If everybody at the table said that at the same time, the individual might go, maybe I should look at this in myself. But if it's just a one-on-one approach, maybe the person would fend those off forever, and effortlessly so. So sometimes I think what we're doing in community is we're looking for empowerment, and we're looking for confidence, resilience, and we're fostering that. So actually, let me talk about that a little bit. Now, if you can shut me up by sticking a hand up and posing another question. But let's say that there's not a problem or a conflict. Let's say that you're a leader in a community and you want something positive to happen. Like, let's say that, and some of you have heard me talk about this before, you want to build trust in a community. How do you do that? Or you want to build respect. I call these organizational virtues. And we have all kinds of them. They're woven all through our value statements that hang on our walls. But just take a noble virtue like trust and ask, how do we build trust in a community? Well, I said earlier, you can use these levels for strategic planning to create the culture you want. The way you do that is you get a diverse group of people, a sufficient number, 20 maybe, and you ask that diverse group, how would you know you'd succeeded in creating a community of trust that you would describe as high level trust in this community. How would you know you'd achieve that? What would be your evidence of that? And stay on all 20 people until they give you a concrete example of how they personally, individually, would know that they succeeded at creating a trusting community. Now, if you listen, I've done this many times. I write all the answers up on the board. If you do that, you'll notice, if you have a large enough sample size, I'm saying 20, that their answers, their descriptions of the proof of trust are going to array themselves across these 6 levels. And it will reveal which level is someone's favorite level. Because somebody's going to go to the group level and they're going to talk about dynamics of the entire community. That, oh, they might say that I'd know we had trust if meetings were efficient and people didn't hold the meeting hostage with their fears. Okay, they're not talking about an individual, they're talking about a group process where there might be several people that are slowing down decision making by holding unprocessed or irrational fears. And if you have a consensus model, you could be at that for years, right? So they might describe the evidence they want as being meetings that click along and are really efficient and we get stuff done. And that would be their evidence that people have high level of trust for each other. Okay, great. You got one and you got the level at which it occurs. So then you could go, somebody else is going to say that this person and that person would actually talk to each other instead of avoiding each other. That would be the proof that I want to see. So-and-so will talk to so-and-so. Or this clique will talk to that clique. This subgroup will talk to that subgroup. Somebody else might say, we don't sing enough songs about trust. I'd know it if we sang songs about trust. Somebody else say we need a dance of trust. So, you know, what level is that, right? I would say those are cultural, symbolic communications or societal level cultural, symbolic communications, either one. So you see, you get a whole page full of all these different aspects of what trust actually looks like. And there's your strategic plan. Then you create each one of those. You know, you put those into motion, you make them a reality. Now, some of them are going to be pretty obvious and some aren't, but there's a way to do each one of those. For example, I was working at Lehigh University for a number of years in their diversity initiative up there. And some of the faculty were decrying the fact that the students didn't have an activist mentality. They didn't care. They didn't have a sense of social justice. And it really bugged the faculty members. And they were thinking about leaving the university because they thought the students were complacent. And so we started to play with this idea and strategize about it a little bit. And well, the person said, you know, that's the way I'd know that this had become a truly inclusive campus if I saw spontaneous protests of injustice out on the quad. Now, what do you think? You can't do anything about spontaneous protests out on the quad? Oh, sure you can, especially if that's your favorite level. So all we did was we put sound equipment near the quad and we made sure the student leaders knew where the sound equipment was. And then we assigned some faculty members that had a stake in this, that cared about student activism, and they connected them with student leaders saying, you know, we'll back you up, we'll support you, and we'll coach you, and we'll run interference for you if you ever decide that you want to speak publicly about some issue. So we just set up all the support conditions and started to tell a story. We also told a story about how cool it was that there were some other campuses in their athletic conference that were doing this. Yeah. Lafayette University is having spontaneous protests and they're making national news and they're getting a lot of respect for it. Oh, well, if they can do it, we can do it. So the storytelling around it, we set it up. It was not even 3 months before some issue popped up in the news and the students were out there spontaneously protesting. Because we understand the communication vehicles at that level of the societal level of one-to-many demonstrations. The communication vehicles are well known. We just had to kind of make them available. Okay, so that's an example of how you play with the different levels in order to reach your overall global objective. Thoughts or questions about any of this? We have another 10 minutes available to us, so we can throw the floor open to anything you want to talk about. It doesn't have to be about the topic so far. Be about where are you from, why are you here? Would you like to come to our gathering on February the 1st? NICA is hosting a gathering February 1st in person at Songaya in Bothell. Helen and I live there. Songaya, 25 minutes northeast of Seattle City Center, maybe 30 minutes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Thomas, for going through these again. I mean, I've attended a presentation and all, but it's these practical applications. I'm one of those people who's just so concrete that I really learned a lot from hearing these. Not only the how to look at a tangle, but also how do you actually talk about a forward goal-oriented way of moving forward. It would take me a while to really get instinctive about this, but I can see its power, and I appreciate the chance to hear the practicalities.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'll also say to Claudia and the van question. We've actually got.
You just froze, Helen.
Obscure enough that it's not the same kind of actual concrete risk that you're talking about, Claudia. But I was wondering if one was working like within the same level, like institutional level, like dodging the zoning thing by creating something else that is recognized by the institution, like your own mobile home park, that's a business and, has a business license, et cetera. Or I don't know what, we're looking at those kinds of workarounds.
Yes, in fact, Justin just found a place near Ashland that he's going to go visit that already is created to be a commercial. Yeah, I mean, you got to get really creative, and so he's going up there on the 15th, and that's maybe the answer. So I was just curious about the zoning thing, because it comes up as, the more that people are living not in houses, San Diego and California is just shutting down everybody who's in a van. You can only stay here from 4 a.m. till 4:45. I mean, there's so much going on, and there are a lot of people who don't have the ability to buy a home, or So anyhow, and maybe it's what Thomas said: as the issue gets bigger and bigger and bigger, there will start to be paying attention to it. I mean, I'm sad to say that. I mean, what about what's going on in Los Angeles? I mean, where are they going to find 15,000 new homes, overnight? They're not. So, yeah, sometimes it's an act of nature that might solve the problem. Yeah. So thank you very much for raising that.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think about this a lot, honestly, and it's one of the big topics of our last gathering, and legal structures. And I think that was the question earlier, like, should we be in touch with an attorney? And I think that was the question, and my thought is yes, because there are lots of cool real estate attorneys who know creative workarounds, at least up here in Washington where I am. So there's resources out there for sure. Thomas.
We have a new institutional level of support. It's called AI.
Yeah.
GPT chat, for example. I mean, we might make one of the robots work for us by asking clever questions. Unless it has a filter that tries to screen out anarchists. I don't know.
Well, we have to do that manually, it seems. So yes, if
Yeah.
you all weren't on the call earlier, thank you for your patience for that's the danger of being a nonprofit with a Zoom link out in the public, is that you get internet trolls. So and that's what I thought of with the question about vulnerability earlier, like is vulnerability inevitable? And I think when you put yourself out there with the intention of, at least within the regards of community, it's often to like attract people or gather resources or network communities themselves networking with each other. And vulnerability it's such a double-edged sword, because in order to find those resources, you do open yourself up. And just seeing that tonight and thinking about communities physical, and as we are learning how to gather more resources like legal knowledge, like funding, like tenants who have an agreement, and like people who can understand contracts. There's a lot of moving parts with the movement of people and land and home, which is going to happen. We're seeing it happen. So it's not like it's a prediction. It's just happening now. So any other final thoughts, questions? If you would like to put in the chat, just for safekeeping, your email address to be sure to be on this follow-up email, that would be great. If not, you can message me, or you might already be on the NICA newsletter list, which is awesome. And so we're streamlining that. This recording will be out there in the future, but any final things before we jump off? Thanks,
Well,
Mark.
let me ask for a closure in particular. Let's do sort of a checkout round if we can, so we've got time to do it. If you think of any appreciations that you have at the moment for yourself, for somebody else, or for the process, any regrets that you want to tag for any reason in order to leave them here and not carry them with you, any takeaways you have that you found, any learnings. So appreciations, regrets, learnings, you can articulate. Let's say goodbye to each other with that device, and anybody can go.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I want to express my appreciation to you that, like Helen earlier, I had heard this before, but I see the value of, even when I don't know which level it is, of like just trying to get a better sense of what level, and that's where the power is. And like if I'm feeling ineffective, it's probably because I'm not addressing the appropriate level. So thank you for that reminder and greater consciousness around that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Claudia here. I am really appreciative that Justin and I showed up here tonight. I didn't know he was coming, and I'm really grateful that we both heard this, which gives us another framework for potentially designing what his dream is, and that we've all latched onto, or hoping to latch onto. So this is a very practical way of determining where the problem or the issue is. And I had never heard it before. I've heard a lot of, management things in my life. I did them, supervision and all that, but this is brand new to me. And this is very practical and very helpful. So thank you very much for presenting this tonight.
Welcome, and good luck to you all. I like what you're doing. It sounds exciting. I love the flexibility of it. Somebody's chasing them, they can just drive away and then circle around and come back.
Mm-hmm.
Very appealing about that. A Robin Hood-esque.
No, well, I mean, there's other threats, but I'm thinking of like
That's
insurance
yeah.
joke in there somewhere.
Going to the future. Anybody else?
I just want to say that this was really helpful for me this time. I just heard in a new way, because I have heard you lay this out before, but it's been a while, Thomas, that what stuck out to me tonight is the simplicity of identifying threats and protections, because it's like that's a felt sense, like that there's a threat or that I am protected, and so to be able to like identify those complex feelings onto the levels it was really helpful. It's very clarifying. And I do want to say, Claudia and Justin, I know you're in California, but I do know some people up in Washington who have done unique things with between mobile and permanent, not permanent housing, and zoning is a big discussion up here. So I just put my email in the chat. If you want to get connected, I can put you in touch with whoever I can to be a resource. So I don't know what we can do, but yes, the more, the merrier.
Thank you. Anybody else to check out?
Definitely appreciate that, Sarah. Good to see you, Claudia, and everybody. Yeah, it's really good to see other people organizing, because this movement feels so disjointed and everybody's reinventing the wheel. Yeah, hopefully we get some more organization in the future. And thanks for your time and some interesting information to mull over. And that one guy that said his place got broken up by the government. So there is real threats that need to be addressed for people to have real safety, however that can be done. Thank you.
Well, I want to express appreciation to the NICA board for putting on this event. This seems to me to be almost like a preview of the kind of things that happen at our gatherings in person. A lot of the content can be presented in, kind of mini workshops just like this, that people can, that we can then afterwards say, if you want more of this and you would like to do it in person, please come to our gathering. And, we tried to make it easy to attend, keep the costs low, the location easy to get to. And if there are barriers that you still see, even after those efforts, if you would just let us know what those are, then we can address them. They will become, known threats that we can deal with at the appropriate level. I also have some thoughts for the board on dealing with those trolls that we don't have to do right here.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Okay. Appreciate everybody's contributions, and I'm not even carrying a regret about the artistic bombers that came in. I just thought that was managingly amusing. So yeah, it could have been a lot worse, and I appreciate that it wasn't worse. They didn't shut us down.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, so we live in a chaotic world, and I'm all for maintaining a sense of humor about that.
Mm-hmm. Amen.